After 14 years in politics, I do my best not to stand behind podiums. Hi, I'm Matt Habash. I'm the CEO of the food bank, and as you just heard, I had the wonderful opportunity to partner with Metro in the past year and a half. And what I want to do is tell you a little bit about that partnership, why I think it was so successful, but also to kind of put a lens through it from different ways. I'm going to talk a little bit about perceptions, a little bit about space. You just saw some fabulous space. I'm ready to go back to high school. And a little bit about innovation and what STEM is all about and how Metro really helped us in an immense way. And so really the title of it was Overcoming Fears in the 21st Century Learning in a Nonprofit. So why connect the two? Well, for us, this journey really began. Some of you that are connected with STEM may know a gentleman named Rich Rosen. He was at Battelle. Rich has been a longtime supporter of the food bank, big supporter of STEM, Metro, actually big supporter of STEM across the country with all the Battelle facilities. And he and I, back in early February of '08, were having a conversation. I was pitching Rich on a new concept. We're building a new building, or we're trying to acquire the space, build a new building, triple the size of our space. Wanted to build, and we eventually built a LEED certified gold facility, and we're pitching him as, our representative to Battelle for a major leadership gift for that capital campaign. And in the course of that conversation, I was talking about wanting to build not just a big warehouse with freezers and coolers and docks and all those kind of things that we would typically do to feed people out of a big warehouse, but to really build a hunger and nutrition education center. And as we got into that conversation around that space, we had the opportunity, you can just go to the first one. We had the opportunity to start the conversation, and what he really did was challenge me to say, how can you involve high school students in a meaningful way in the work of the food bank? So it isn't just come to do your service learning hours, just to come to do a volunteer pack project, but how could you really do that? So fast forward now about 2 years, we're open. We opened in October of '08. Or '09, and this is early 2010, and I walk into my senior staff, and just to give you a sense, as you heard, I've been around 27, 28, in my 28th year now. Most of my senior staff's been with me just about that whole time. So you could say it's a little bit curmudgeon-y, a little bit tough to deal with sometimes. Change was, and we had just gone through this massive change and moved into this huge facility. It was 3 times the size of our other facility. I walk into the senior staff meeting and said, we're going to have a high school class coming here to do some project work. And you could have heard a pin drop, and then you heard the moaning. I wish I had a camera to take pictures of their faces when I said we were going to do this. It was literally, it started bringing back all kinds of things. Somebody said, I used to be a middle school teacher, and there's a reason I don't do that anymore. It's like, I quickly quit. Well, good, because they're high school kids now. Or they just looked at me and said, we've had MBA, we've gotten 6 Sigma to death since we've been in here, MBA studying our processes. We've had, consultants from major accounting firms doing process mapping of every operation we had, PhD student in here doing research with us. It was just on, nutrition interns, and they ultimately, it literally triggered something in me. And then they finally said, and these are high school kids who are going to do a science project. What are you thinking? And immediately I had this flashback to my own high school science project, and it literally was a sophomore in high school, and my chemistry teacher basically said, you got to do a science fair. And I said, I don't want to do a science fair. She said, you got to do one. So I went to my math teacher because I like math, didn't like chemistry. And all I did was literally, she gave me a geometry problem, which was prove the theory of the 9-point circle on a poster. So anybody knows math, it was a pretty simple, imagine yellow cardboard poster, and I didn't even go to the science fair. I was sick that day, and I ended up winning some kind of award, I think because there weren't any math projects and I was the only one there, but literally didn't go. Chemistry teacher wasn't real happy, but that's my image. That's what that brought back to me when they started talking. And then finally somebody got me out of my daze, and they said, Matt, think pink pig. And the pink pig for us was the symbol of, at that point in time, of project work that had happened. Literally, it was a master's level marketing class at one of our universities here in town who would come in to help us think that we could do for free all of our rebranding of our food bank. And in the course of that quarter, they had to come up with projects. And one of the classes' ultimate project was, and they literally came in with this paper mache, cardboard, pink pig. And the campaign was, we were going to create pink pigs and have them in all these places around the country or the city, and they're going to raise money for us. And this is master's level graduate students in marketing, and that was their best idea. And I'm going, really? And I never got why they said pink. I got the pig connection. They connected pig and food and piggy banks, but I never got why it was pink, because that wasn't our color. But anyway, that became the symbol for any time anybody had a really bad idea. So the good news for me was simply, in the transition from moving from Mound Street down to Grove City, that little pink pig got lost. And it wasn't there for them to go get, and fortunately, because I think that's where they were. And then I made it a little worse. I also said, oh, by the way, because we had done a little project earlier with Metro, but the students weren't on site. And I said, the students are going to be here in the building, and you're going to mentor them through this process. And they were really not happy with me. Now, when I talk a little bit about that connection of those perceptions, and that's what we were coming into, then into space. And if you can flick to next picture. This was actually the classroom, and what we created when I said that Center for Hungry Education that the students were in, and then the picture after that, is this massive, looks like cafeteria in school. It's a room that seats about 300 people. It's got full-scale audio. That's a complete commercial kitchen at the end of it. And then that little classroom you saw in the space before that, there are 5 of those throughout the building. All on the first floor, all in what we would deem public space. Well, I really wanted the students integrated into our space, and that was important to me, that they become part of us. So when I also said, by the way, we're going to fully integrate them, it was like a light bulb went off. And because we had an upstairs mezzanine, and that's where the staff break room was, the staff lounge was, and the staff offices. And I said, these students have free reign. We'll give them pass key cards to get through any area they need to get to, and they have free reign. And you'd have thought I'd dropped a bomb. It was like, they get to come into our private space. They're not downstairs in the community meeting space. And it really hit me as I said I wanted to integrate. I said, you got to think of them as employees and staff of the organization, not as people doing a project. And it really didn't click, because they came and they were there for the 12 weeks until they really got into project work. Because when they first came, I give them a tour, and we spend about an hour, and we're thinking of questions we have, projects they can do. And it really crystallized as they started to get into that work. And then they started to work directly with the mentors, and we had some fabulous results that I'm going to talk about a little bit under innovation. We forgot that, though, and I think the lesson learned, the next year, they're there all year. And that year they were there time pretty much all day. Whenever they were, in typical STEM, they're never anywhere all day in the same space. But they were there all day. The next year, they're there for just a class. And it starts, and it's the entire school year. The idea was, don't put this such a crunch capstone, spread it out. The class is there, more time to integrate, yada, yada. And what we found out was, since they weren't going to do the project work again until the 3rd quarter, and really started in the middle of the 2nd quarter, starting to questions, they never really integrated. They became downstairs in that little classroom that I showed you, and they literally had no interaction for us, except they had access to the private space. Well, they hadn't been integrated yet. So here they come, and they don't show up till noon. Well, like all the rest of us and typical high school students, they're hungry. So they come up to the break room. One of the neat things we had in our break room was we had a soda fountain for free soda pop. Now, we did it as a green thing and building a LEED building and not having cans and bottles and all that kind of stuff, and staff has access to free soda pop. Doesn't cost as much as you think. Put a lot of diet versions in there, try to keep down the calorie counts, et cetera, do all the things that my nutritionist wife would tell me we needed to be doing when she found out we had a soda fountain. But the students had access to that. So the first thing they do is march upstairs. It's after 12 o'clock. They don't start class till 12:30. And they're rummaging through, and they come in hungry. So any food that's available, they start foraging. And then they discover we have a break. They know that we also have volunteers on the first floor, and they have a couple meeting rooms, and they have their own kitchenette. And volunteer corporate groups often come in, have their own meeting, bring in lunch. And the lunch is usually Donato's Pizza. So here's pizza sitting around in this break room. Volunteers out, and the students are walking around. So you can imagine what happened to the pizza. So it created this immense amount of angst. And what we forgot was we didn't integrate them. And that did not happen again until we really started on the project work. So it was a real lesson for us about the importance of space, the importance of integrating, and what we screwed up. We really didn't do that well until we got into the project work. But it's really the project work that turned all of this for me. It's been invaluable in terms of what happened. And I'm going to talk briefly about 4 projects. Let's click to the first one. Go back one. This space Remember I said I took them on a tour. One of the stops is a food pantry. We actually built a food pantry into the space. So a food bank's a gigantic warehouse. Food pantries where we give food to, and then they distribute it to the clients, just so you're familiar with how this all works and the terminology between the two. Well, we created space in there to be a learning lab. And as I stopped on the tour, I said one thing about food pantry distributions that I wanted to explore a change. And that is, a typical food pantry would give you a 3-day supply of food. You'd walk in, family of 4, you get enough food for a family of 4, hopefully 3 breakfasts, 3 lunch, 3 dinners. That's the model. It evolved over the years to what they call a choice pantry, which is you come in and you get to shop the shelves and within categories, food pyramiding, all those kind of things. But you still had limited, and the idea was still you were going to go out with 3 breakfasts, 3 lunches, and 3 dinners. You just got to pick the foods. The next day, Neil came to me and said, we definitely have one project done as long as you'll agree to mentor it. And I said, what? And she goes, I have a student that really wants to help you figure out that pantry. Because the question that I was asking, that I just said it once and she picked up on it, was what if we let the client pick their own food? What if we didn't judge it? What if we didn't put any limits? What's the least restriction we could put on a client coming into a food pantry? Let them take whatever they need as opposed to what we think they need and trying to give them a 3-day balanced meal. She heard that, immediately came in, and when I talked to her, she simply said, I've been there. When my dad got laid off, we had to use a food pantry. We got food handed to us, food we didn't like, didn't eat, didn't want, or allergic to. We wasted food. So I get it immediately, and I think there's a better system. And she went through the quarter and created for us, when we're going to open this thing here in a few weeks, literally a whole new way to operate that thing on a different kind of point structure and lets the client come in and pick the foods they want. So it was her work that's going to be that. We piloted it at our facility. If it works well, we then use it as a prototype. I have 300 pantries across 20 counties. So it's a new way of operating, thinking about it, all done by the student. The second one, this wonderful piece of vacant ground. This picture is actually taken from we have an outside eating area in addition to our cafeteria on the 2nd floor. Students love to hang out there when it was nice weather in the spring. That land is across the street. One of the problems I talked about was when we fill up that community room I show you, and when we fill up this big volunteer repack space, we have some 12,000 volunteers put in 50,000 volunteer hours repacking food for us. When both of those happen, there's no parking, and my staff, there's not enough parking. So I wanted to build an additional parking lot. That's across the street. There's actually a road. That's actually a main street there right from our entrance. And so we wanted to build a parking lot. But being green, I wanted to build a grass parking lot. They're actually out here. There's one out in this neck of the woods somewhere I haven't seen yet. But it's a way you can actually park on, drive on, cut the grass, plow the snow, still park on it. Building green, you don't have to put storm sewers in, asphalt, all of that. So the first project, we actually had 2 projects done with this. The first one was to go cost out, what does it cost, and what are all the rules in building a parking lot? Because I mentioned that's a main street, therefore it's called an ancillary parking lot. This is more than you're going to want to know, but 14 years of politics, I spent a lot of times at city council debating where these kind of things go. But literally, you've got to get permission from the city to do that. Had them do all that kind of research and bring all of that back. So that was the first year. The second year, the second set of students picked it up and said, okay, we're actually going to design it and go out and figure out what it is. And they got to work directly with our architects, which also turned out to be a wonderful thing for me, because if I just had commissioned the architects to do that, they'd have charged me big bucks. But because I had the students involved, they got to work down with the architects, right in, learn again everything that's involved in building something within a community, what the rules are, what the city requires you to do. And here we're trying to explain to Grove City, we're going to build a grass parking lot. And if anybody understands anything about parking lots, it's like asphalt and concrete. Anything else is viewed as a step down, and nobody likes it. Gravel, just parking on the grass, none of that stuff works. But there's a way you actually build these things that are legit. You build them very similar. But the idea was we could make it a garden, because it was going to be just overflow parking. And they designed this wonderful, we now have 4 different designs to pick from that we're now partnering with Scott's on how we're going to do this, because they're actually working on grasses that can grow when your oil and your antifreeze drips on them. Looking at all that, and we're going to be able to build a parking lot that has gardens built into it. Every time you have a light standard in so many feet, you have to have a light standard for safety and parking. They all become gardens. And we literally can grow food on this as well. And it looks like a park instead of just a big set of asphalt that's only occasionally used. All done by 2 different sets of high school students. Third project's actually not a picture. It's a project. This was a student that I had this year. She was absolutely amazing. I think she was the valedictorian of her home school. And she was just, I've never met somebody, and was like, I actually hired her for the summer. Anyway, she comes up and she says, I live on the west side of Columbus. I want to do something, inner city in terms of the project. What do you think? I said, well, to give you an idea, we have 122 food pantries in Franklin County. 18 of them do 50%, half the volume. 35 to 75% of the volume. We had a question, which simply was, rather than treating all 122 the same, what if we partnered differently with a certain number of bigger pantries, making sure we had 6-day-a-week coverage, night coverage, accessible, all the people that are out of work right now that, or are working and getting paid, hourly wage, can't get to a food pantry during the day. You're not going to take off your hourly wage, go to a food pantry, kind of defeats the purpose. So could we create night hours, weekend hours? Could we look at it differently, look at the geography of the county and start to do that? She took that idea and literally crafted for us an interview process where we identified 40 pantries that we were going to go out and do interviews. She worked with our VP of marketing to create an interview guide, because I really said it's about a conversation. It's not about go out and check the boxes when you go out and ask these. Really understand how they operate, what they're thinking, what their attitudes are about doing more, giving more, changing the way they do business, and what would it take. Crafted all that, put together this massive spreadsheet, had the undaunting task of taking 14 of my senior staff and top managers who had to go out and do 3 interviews each, basically, get them all scheduled and keep them on schedule. Then we decided we had my wife does research at Ohio State, has this wonderful little new pen that you can record, and it writes in a book and all that. I said, we ought to use those, because that way they don't have to write. They can record the thing and have the conversation, and it does some nice little neat things, and you can also come back and dump it all on a computer, and you have it all. She figured out those, where to get them, where to buy them, convinced my finance CFO to buy them, and literally got them in, learned how to use it herself, and then trained those 14 people on how to use it, then kept track of them all to make sure that they were getting passed out, because we didn't buy 14 of them, and they were passing them around as they needed. Took all of that, recorded all of that, came back, and her finished project for the school was really around what she saw. And then I actually said, what are you doing for the summer? She was looking for a job. She actually, I think, got fired from a job because she was trying to study so much, and they wanted her to work till midnight every night, and she was working somewhere at a coffee shop or something like that. I said, I will hire you. And so she worked for me for the summer to continue this project work. So it really was a case of, for us, even at that level, being able to organize, and if you could see the level of detail in what she did and how passionate she was, because she lived 2 blocks from a pantry on the west side, which has now become our first strategic partner. Lutheran Social Services Pantry on the west side is going to open up a little further down in the Great Western Shopping Center, and it's a much larger facility, and we've designed all of this from the facility from her work, and it's the first of what I hope are many strategic partners around this county and then as we go out into the other counties. So her work has directly led to the first prototype that's going to kick off here shortly. And the final project that I want to talk about is probably the signature project for me, because it's so visible. And that right there is our garden. This started out for us as that was just a piece of grass on the side of the building. That's the food pantry right behind that steel right there. And just to the right of that are the loading docks where the agencies pick up on the other end of the buildings where the tractor trailers are. And it was a piece of grass. And literally the day after it got seeded, when we were first doing all the outside finish work, I went, we shouldn't have done that. In the front of the building, we have a little community garden, and that was our signature in the turnaround. And all of a sudden, I said, what if we made this a garden? So this class that was with us the first 12 weeks, a botany class. And so one of them takes it on and says, I think we can build a garden, I can do this. So her whole thing was around even figuring out the companion planting and how we should do all of that, and she starts on that project. We had another student who wanted to study the energy output. We have freezers and coolers that will hold about 65 semi-loads, big, massive, and wanted to study the energy output and was it really doing what it said it did for our LEED certification. But when he saw that project, he said, I think we can improve upon this. And he designed, and you can barely see, but in the far right, middle of the right on the side edge, there's a rain barrel right underneath the edge of that. The entire side of this building has rain barrels. Half the roof pitches, 175,000 square foot roof. Half the roof, half-inch of rain fills all these rain barrels, massive tank in the back. They connect to those little green ones that are on top. That's the only manual part of this operation, is to keep those full, because a half-inch of rain and those is a half-inch of rain, and that's it. And then what he designed is that's actually a solar panel on top of that pergola. And what it does is it runs the digital timers and the pumps for all soaker hoses, because what the first student figured out was the soil that we had wasn't good enough and we needed to do raised beds. So he put this massive volunteer project together with people to build, with the masters gardeners from the conservatory, and they turned this in. This garden, which was just going to be grass, is now producing about 2 tons of food a year. And the ultimate goal is that's the pantry. So when the pantry when the pantry's open next year and the garden's in full operation, clients can actually go out and pick their own fresh food right out of the garden. All designed by high school students. You know, so when you talk about solar, in fact, when they hooked up the solar panels, first the student was upset because they were coming from Arizona. In his world, that was too far of a carbon footprint. We ought to be able to find these closer. And he did. He found them in Indiana. Second thing was he was a little upset because the pumps. He said, the pump I thought was going to work isn't going to work. It's going to be more expensive. I said, what that means? He said, it's going to cost an extra $50. I said, okay, in my world, we can deal with this. You know, so he comes in. They hook up the solar panel, and the guy here locally who was the installer for those, it doesn't work. The student figured out the guy had cross-wired it backwards. He got it figured out, and he comes and gets me, and he plugs in his laptop to prove to me this thing is putting out energy. So, I mean, it was this massive amount of ingenuity and work and creativity and innovation that went into what was going to be a vacant piece of grass just on the side of our building. It's also, you can see this off of Interstate 71, so it's this really nice thing when it's as colorful as it is in that photo. But for me, that's what the key learning was. It was about how you pull the students together. And it was interesting when we did the wrap-up, we had a pizza party for them, and they do all their presentations. We asked a particular student, what was your biggest learning? We asked them all that question. His was the one that sticks out. He said, people lie. I said, what do you mean by that? He says, well, they told me it'd be delivered by this time. This guy told me he knew what he was doing. I said, you learn more life lessons in one project than most of us will learn in a life. I said, just remember that. People sometimes they don't quite tell you the truth, and you got to work your way through all of that. And he did, but it was like this signature comment that really drove what I thought was the directness of these students. But it really was their passion. So when you think about my little science project, and you think about these projects and what they've become, they became our R&D department. They literally worked that well together. We got this fabulous amount of work and these great students, and I think it really did turn. If you go back to that original question that somebody blurted out when I first announced this about what are we going to learn from high school students. Those are the kinds of things we're learning from the Metro students, and it has been this fabulous partnership. And thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Matt.